A Heroine's Beginning, Chapter 19. 2 weeks later. The comfort surrounded me. It was like floating in a cloud. Sunlight drifted in through the windows, illuminating the room. I slowly opened my eyes, reveling in the softness of the bed I was in. I had never been in such a comfortable bed. There was a layer of real goose feathers on top of the mattress. This made you practically sink into the bed. My bed at home was a simple straw-stuffed fabric box. This was as if someone had captured a cloud from the highest reaches of the sky, brought it down, covered it in gossamer, and placed it carefully on the bed. It was strange not being woken up by my younger siblings, or a straw sticking into my side. It was fantastic. I had slept in slightly. The sun was fairly high in the sky. Several hours passed on. But as I was here as a guest, it did not matter. I was staying in the Duke's palace, as a guest, like the nobility. When Ella had invited me to stay with her for the wedding, I had expected to be in the servants' quarters, or a spare bed in a small room. I had never imagined I would be in one of the guest suites. This room was larger than my house. The walls were painted a light spring green, with floral decorations etched along the border. There was enough space in the room for a chaise longue, covered in gray velvet, and a fireplace with a marble mantel. I knew the Duke was wealthy, but I never thought anyone was so wealthy that they could afford to decorate their guest rooms like that. I had arrived at the palace yesterday. Ella had sent a carriage to pick me up and bring me to help with the wedding preparations. The 20 minutes it took to get there in the carriage was actually very comfortable. The last time I had made that trip, I was in the back of a cart that shook and jolted every time we hit a rut in the road. By the time we got there, we had been jostled about so much, we had to take a few minutes before entering the ballroom. But arriving in the carriage was so much nicer, it was almost like we were gliding by comparison. Ella had greeted me on the front steps, running towards me and throwing her arms around me as soon as I stepped out. She looked so much better than she had done that day at the manor. There was color in her cheeks, and while she was still very thin, she just looked skinny rather than skeletal. Her ragged blue dress was gone, and replaced with a pretty pink day dress, with all the hemming intact. We had spent the day catching up, wandering around the palace, and discussing wedding plans. It was to take place 2 days after I arrived, and there was still so much to be done. But I was given the very special task of being one of Ella's bridesmaids. The other bridesmaid was Jacqueline. Lady Evil and Lady Idiot were not invited, which I thought served them right. I guess they would be fine just missing Ella's wedding, but not the biggest social event in the area of the year. I hoped they were bereft. As a bridesmaid, I was given a beautiful new dress to wear, the same style as Jacqueline. They were sky blue silk, with no sleeves. Only a small piece of chiffon covered the shoulders. A golden floral pattern decorated the neckline and the bottom of the skirt, and a golden sash was tied around the waistline of the dress. Although I preferred my emerald dress, I had to admit how beautiful this one was. Myself, Jacqueline, and Ella spent the afternoon having our dresses fitted, giggling amongst ourselves every time we accidentally disobeyed the seamstress's command, which was usually, "Stay still." Jacqueline had apologized to me when we first saw each other, and I had forgiven her completely. I had found in her an unlikely friend, even if she was still a little shy. The food there was amazing. I had a small sample of it at the ball, but eating 3 courses of it was something quite different. The only thing about the meals was that they were in the dining room, and were also attended by Lord Christopher and his father, the Duke. They were perfectly polite to me, and Lord Christopher even tried to include me in their conversation occasionally. These attempts were short-lived, though, as his attention was very clearly on Ella all the time. The way they looked at each other, the way they joked and laughed with each other, it was clear they did not care if anyone else was in the room. It reminded me of a story in my book, the one I used to tell to my sisters. The golden-haired princess, who fell desperately in love with a servant boy, and chooses a life of poverty over a royal one just to be with him. It was similar, I suppose, but in reverse. Fortunately for Ella, though, society meant that her situation in life was elevated, not Lord Christopher's brought down low. but I was sure the love was the same. I even caught them a few times holding each other's hand underneath the table between courses. Lord Christopher was always holding her hand firmly, not in anger, though, almost as if he needed to reassure himself that she was still there beside him, and she wasn't going to run away again. The next morning, when I had finished my musings over the comfort of the bed, I reached over and pulled the cord next to my bed. I now had the power to summon servants, and it felt good. I sat up and arranged the sheets around me so they were slightly neater, like I was composed even in sleep. A maid, she could not have been much older than 15, entered the room and curtsied. I had never been curtsied to, and found it rather strange, but nice. I asked her for some breakfast, and she left with another curtsy. I began to see why the nobility liked servants to bow and curtsy to them so much. I rolled out of bed, and started to change into the dress that I wore the previous night to dinner. Ella had lent it to me, mainly so that I wouldn't be treated like a servant while I was here. It was a simple cream muslin dress, with a simple pattern of flowers printed onto it. It was drawn in higher than my waist, so it had a distinctly empire line feel to it. I slipped it on over my head, and pulled the laces in the back, tying them into a bow. I sat down at the small table in my room when my breakfast arrived, and ate it quickly. I knew there was much to get done that day. The wedding was the day after, so everything needed to be sorted out by today at the latest. I left my room and searched for Ella, ready for my first task of the day. I had been to Ella's room before. It was where we had our fitting done. But the problem was, I didn't know how to get there from my room. I spent a long while getting lost, and there was not a single servant around to ask for directions. I rounded a corner, still hopelessly lost, when I accidentally walked completely headfirst into someone else. They were quite a bit bigger than me, and I stumbled backwards and ended up on the floor, with a rather painful crash. "I'm very sorry," I heard a familiar voice say. I turned my head to look up, and saw the concerned face of Lord Christopher looking down at me. He offered his hand forward, and I took it, as he pulled me to my feet. "I'm sorry too, my lord," I said. "I should have been looking where I was going." "There's no need to call me that," he said with a smile on his face. "As a friend of Ella, you're also a friend of mine, and I am not a lord to a friend, only Christopher." "Well then, thank you for your assistance, Christopher," I told him, the name sounding strange on my lips. "I believe I also owe you thanks," he said, "for that day at the manor. Without you there to guide us, I don't think I ever would have found my Ella again. You have my eternal gratitude for your help." "You are very welcome. I'm just glad she's no longer in that house," I said. "So am I. With all the things that went on there, I am so glad she is nowhere near that evil woman. Hopefully soon she will be out of our lives for good, just as soon as James gets that evidence." "I'm sorry, what evidence?" I asked, very confused. "Oh, I thought you knew. James started this investigation based on something you said." "Pardon?" I was getting more and more confused by the second. "It's nothing to worry about. Hopefully James will explain when he gets here. Anyway, was there a reason you were here, before I accidentally ran into you?" he asked. "Yes, I was trying to find Ella's room. I got a little lost, I'm afraid," I told him. "As luck would have it, I'm also headed that way. Would you like to accompany me?" he asked, offering me his arm. I nodded and took it. We started walking in the direction I had just come from. Clearly my sense of direction needed some fine-tuning. "James is supposed to arrive back this afternoon. I think the two of you know each other?" he asked. "Yes, we met at the ball." "And what do you think of him?" he asked. I was a little taken aback by his question. My face must have betrayed this, as Christopher smiled and reassured me. "I only ask, as it seems he's quite taken with you. I've heard tales of you from Ella, and every time she speaks of you, James listens very attentively." I was surprised to hear this. "He also talks of you whenever the topic of the ball or the day at the manor turns up in conversation. He seems to have a very high opinion of you. So, I am asking,
as a friend of James. What do you think of him?"
"He is—" I struggled to find the words. Arrogant and smug were the first things that came to my mind. I knew he wasn't really like that, if that day at the manor was anything to go by. I knew he hid behind his sarcasm and his confidence a bit. I struggled to sketch his character completely, and that intrigued me. Despite all the arrogance and wit, I liked him. I enjoyed the conversations we had, and the jokes we shared.
"Go on, be honest," Christopher said.
"He's a bit arrogant," I answered before I could stop myself.
Christopher laughed. "Yes, he does come across that way a bit," he told me. "But once you get to know him, he's actually very witty and intelligent, and very caring for those who mean a great deal to him. He told us you had a nickname for him, but he wouldn't tell us what it was. Please tell me. I would love to know."
"Lord Smug," I said. Christopher actually stopped walking to laugh at that one.
"Very accurate," he managed to get out through his laughter. "I can see why he likes you."
Once we started moving again, we fell into an easy conversation about the upcoming wedding. He said he had a list of final checks he needed to perform today to make sure everything went smoothly. I knew I had things to do, but I needed Ella to tell me what they were. We finally arrived at Ella's door. Christopher knocked gently, and a moment later it was opened to reveal Ella, already dressed, and it looked like she was in the middle of writing. Her right hand held a quill and a few ink smudges. Her face lit up when she saw Christopher and myself, though it was probably more to do with Christopher's presence than mine. "Oh, I'm so happy you're here. Come, I'm making a list for both of you." She took Christopher's hand and pulled him inside. I followed. Jacqueline was already there, sitting on the sofa in Ella's room. She was also writing what seemed to be a list of tasks. "Marion, please sit. I've not finished yours quite yet." "Oh, there is so much to do," she said, gesturing to the sofa. I took a seat next to Jacqueline and started reading her list. "This is your list, my love," she said, handing Christopher a note covered in writing. He glanced at it for a moment and then looked up at her.
"Ella, my dear, can I ask you something about this item here?" he inquired. "In private?"
She nodded, and they both left the room, walking into the corridor and shutting the door behind them. I looked at Jacqueline, and she looked back at me, and then we both burst out into giggles. "Oh, my days, they are terrible at lying, aren't they?" I said. "They really are," she replied. "But I think it's sweet." I heard something. "Wait, they're actually discussing something," I exclaimed. It was true. We could hear muffled sounds of a conversation. "They were actually telling the truth," Jacqueline whispered. We listened in silence for a moment, but then the muffled voices fell silent, and there was no movement of the door opening. "No, they weren't," I told her. "So what are your tasks for today?" "I have to see to the food, make sure that enough has been ordered and such. I don't know what you're doing, but I've been told that we have to be back here at 3. Ella is having her final fitting of her wedding dress." "Have you seen it yet?" I asked her, curious as to what she had chosen. "No, she has kept it a complete secret. She told me that she wanted you to be here before she showed anyone else." I was touched by this. We were snapped out of our conversation by the door opening and Ella walking in. Her face was bright red and blushing, with no sign of Christopher following her. I raised an eyebrow when I caught her eye, and her face went an even deeper shade of red. "Ella, what took you so long?" I teased. She did not answer me. She just smiled with her head down. Jacqueline started laughing, and I followed. Trust Ella to be embarrassed by wanting to spend time with her fiancé. She eventually joined in, and came to sit down next to us on the sofa. "So today," she began, once we had all calmed down. "Jacqueline, you're checking on the food for tomorrow. Marion, I need you to check the content of the spring drawing room. There should be a maid there who knows what to do. Then I need you to greet the orchestra and show them where to set up in the ballroom. I would imagine they'd like to practice in there before tomorrow. I then need you both back here by 3 o'clock. I'm having my final dress fitting, and I would like so much for you to both see it first. Are we clear on what we have to do?" she asked. I sat there a little stunned. I had never seen Ella take charge of an event like this before. I had no idea she was this organized. I nodded, and then added, "Yes, I'm clear. But 2 questions. 1, what is in the spring drawing room?" "You'll find out when you get there," she responded. I waited for her to elaborate, but clearly she was not going to. 2, can someone show me how to get there? I got lost on the way here, and I have no clue how to get around this palace. Ella nodded and moved to pull the rope to summon a servant. She then sat down at her desk and began writing. After a few minutes, she handed me a note and told me not to open it until I got to the spring drawing room. I was very curious now what exactly was inside the spring drawing room, but I did not open the note. A knock came from the door, and a maid walked in. "Please, will you show Marion the way to the spring drawing room? I would be very much obliged if you would," Ella told the maid. She had always been very polite to servants. The girl nodded, and I followed her out of the room, with Ella shouting, "No later than 3 o'clock," after me. We arrived at the spring drawing room, and the maid told me she had to go. They were cleaning out the bedrooms for the guests due to arrive that day. I knew how much work that took, so I thanked her and told her to hurry back. I stood outside the room for a moment and cautiously opened the note that Ella had written for me. Inside was a list of my siblings' names, with space next to each one. My father's name was also on the list. I was very confused now, so I pushed open the door. Inside were 8 mannequins, each with a label stuck on. There were 8 different outfits, very well made, adorning the mannequins, each varying in size. 6 male outfits and 2 female. When I looked closer, I saw that the labels had the names Alexander, Daniel, Clara, Richard, Tom, Robbie, Gwen, and Mr. Brown written on them. Ella had given my family clothes to wear to the wedding. They were quite simple by comparison to what I would be wearing, but they would fit in with the rest of the wedding party. I glanced down to the bottom of the note. "I'm not quite sure what size each member of your family is, so I took a guess. Please adjust them so they will fit. I hope they will like them. Ella." I silently thanked Ella for the gift. I was sure they would love these clothes. After spending a year at home repairing and stitching most of their clothes, I was quite confident I knew their measurements. I realized that's what the space next to their names was for. I spotted an inkwell and quill on a table and started writing them down. A small knock came at the door, and 2 maids came in, their arms full of sewing baskets and pincushions. I recognized one of the girls as the one who brought me breakfast that morning. "Excuse us, miss, but we were told to assist you with some alterations," one of them said. "Yes, thank you," I told them, still in a bit of a daze. I thought one fine dress was a huge gift from her, but another 8? She really was an angel. We set to work. I told the girls what measurements Alexander and Daniel were, and I set to work on Clara's dress. It was nearly perfect, just an inch or 2 too long for her, and that was quickly remedied. Father's didn't need any altering at all. Richard's and Tom's were a little bit short, so we applied a patterned ribbon along the bottom to make the coat slightly longer. All the boys' outfits were in the same style: shirt, cravat, waistcoat, trousers, and a colored jacket that matched the cravat. But they were all different colors and had different decorations, so that they looked similar but not exactly the same. The girls had similar designs as well. Gwen had an adorable pale pink dress that puffed out at the sleeves and would swirl when she turned around. Clara also had puffed sleeves in pale lilac, but they did not seem childish on her design. Her dress was composed of a bodice and a long chiffon skirt, and I thought it would make her look as pretty as a princess. It didn't take very long to adjust all the clothes. They were nearly at perfect sizes already. So by the time the clock on the mantel struck midday, we were packing up the outfits into a waiting trunk. The maids then carried it out of the room. They said that Ella had arranged a cart to take them to my home, so that my family could try them on, and arrive at the palace fully dressed tomorrow. I thanked the girls for their time and help, and they left. I paused for a moment. I was not completely sure of my next task. I knew it was something to do with the orchestra, but what? I was saved, however, when a footman entered the room and told me that lunch was being served if I would like some. I was not really hungry, that breakfast was more than I normally ate in a day, but I nodded and thought I might see Ella to thank her. I was escorted to the dining room. My sense of direction in the palace was slowly getting better and better. As I walked, I wondered. I had always enjoyed sewing, and I thought I was moderately good at it. Clearly the girls in the village thought so. My mind was driven to distraction all these days when I was stuck in the house, doing the boring chores and cooking. I hated it. I wanted to do something else for the rest of my life. My family certainly needed the money, so if I could just make my father see that I would be much more useful going away and finding work, I was sure he would let me. As much as I loved my siblings, I wanted independence, not having to clean up after them all the time, not having to cook for them every day. I arrived at the dining room. There were people already there, helping themselves to food, which was set up on a table on the side of the room. Jacqueline was there, so was Christopher and his father, but no Ella. She must have been running late. I moved over to the small table and added a little food to my plate, and then sat down next to Jacqueline. We talked about our mornings. She had been busy organizing the kitchens and the food. There was such a vast quantity to be ordered that some of it was being made today and baked tomorrow. The supplies kept running out due to high demand and constantly had to be restocked. She looked a little dazed when we spoke. After her morning of running around trying to get things sorted, she told me she was still quite shy, so the cook had let her use a private room to organize things out of, and the cook would be the one delivering the instructions to the staff. Our talk was interrupted, however, when the doors to the dining room were opened, and a familiar face walked in beaming. James had arrived.